The Lightblade Strike is the first GM Nightfall for Season of the Deep, and in my estimation, the hardest GM out of the current lineup, or even in the game entirely, for that matter. The drop for the week is the Wendigo Adept. To be exact, this is the Week 4 drop. Grandmasters are launching earlier this season for some reason, but are not giving you the guild node until Week 7. Why? I don't know. It's a great question from Bungie, though. I think the guild should be out. We didn't scale leveling the season. Why not? Don't know. Anyway, in any case, one of the better grenade launchers in the game in Wendigo is only rivaled by Perganonant. Hopefully some of you got the joke there, otherwise I feel very old. While the two weapons can roll very similarly, Wendigo does have the slight advantage of being an adept weapon, thus having access to adept mods, and of course being a different affinity in Arc versus Void. Onto the strike itself, this is a hive-based strike filled with almost entirely Arc-based damage enemies with a few Void enemies sprinkled in, namely the Hive Lightbearers and a couple of Ogres and Shriekers at the end as you face right before the boss. On a small note, the majority of this background footage will feature the boss room of the strike, as I believe this to be the true part of the strike that people may need some general guidance on, although I'll briefly mention some tips before getting to the boss room as well. Defensively, I would recommend speccing hard into Arc Resist and Concussive Dampener. Additionally, if you're running an Arc subclass, you can also put Harmonic Resist on, as it'll do the same job as Arc Resist, but give you a better percentage rather than two Arc Resist mods, which give diminishing returns. Now, speaking of subclasses, let's talk about what you should run for this strike. Titans, despite being Season of Arc spam, I believe your best call for this strike is still Strand. Strand Titans having built-in high survivability and the ability to essentially spam Woven Mail on command makes a big difference in the boss room. Additionally, you can also have the capability of easily staggering and killing buried champions, which are also heavily featured in the boss room. Warlocks, I think this is the one time I can finally say you're free of your shackles, also known as Well of Radiance. In this strike, it just doesn't mesh that well with the structure of the strike and how the boss will be heavily in your face most of the time. Don't get me wrong, it's still a busted super and it can help you at certain times. However, I think your best option here is actually going to be Arc Warlock, believe it or not. Remember how I mentioned that this strike is mostly Arc-based damage? So recently, I adopted my strategy during a solo flawless run in Ghost of the Deep, the dungeon that just came out, which, wouldn't you know it, was also heavily Arc-based, given that it's also the Hive, and this build absolutely dunks on ad waves that are Arc-based. Now, given this is a GM, I understand that it's different scaling between a dungeon and GM, but trust me, the resistance this build gives is actually very worth it. The build includes running Arc Souls, Getaway Artist for your Arc Souls, and Risk Runner, and the idea is you always have your grenade up for Arc Souls, and your Rift is there to complement that. Meanwhile, Risk Runner allows you to resist incoming Arc damage on top of your Arc Chest Resist mods, and or Harmonic, whatever you choose to do. And in combination with all of this, you also have Arc mods in your Seasonal Artifact that allow you to resist even more damage. The mod in question here is Amped Up, which gives you damage resistance when you're amplified, which is very easy on Arc. Additionally, you could run Shock and Awe, and while you are amplified, the Arc final blows that you generate will jolt targets. Also really good. This doesn't even include having a Woven Mail teammate like a Titan, by the way. Hunters, you have a few choices to choose from here. Night Stalker for camo spam, and the utility to tether waves in the boss room with tether to clear champions in an instant. Or you also have Assassin's Cal Arc Hunters, who can deal massive damage in this strike between Combination Blow and Gathering Storm. Neither is the wrong choice per se, however, I think Tether wins out here in the end due to the damage output falling off a bit for Arc Hunters in the boss room, as you'll be dodging the boss a majority of the time outside of a Gathering Storm super here and there. And your Combination Blow stacks may be tough to pull off depending on how fast you go through the ad waves and the boss's health gates. For weapons, Arbalist is once again a top pick because there's literally no reason to not use Arbalist. It is so very, very dumb. It allows you to instantly stun barrier champions, which is a massive advantage on its own and can save your life as you're being hunted down by the boss and have little time to react. Conditional Finality is a solid pick as well, as it can take care of both barrier champions and unstoppable champions, as well as put decent damage in on the boss, and we'll get to that. For other players on a different exotic such as Risk Runner, I'd recommend some form of barrier stun as backup. This will depend on what your artifact is and available during any given season that you could be watching this, or you could opt to use something like Riptide, which can freeze the champion as well. One last shout out to Waveframe grenade launchers. You can now have a Waveframe in either the kinetic or the energy slot, and they can be valuable in sections like the Darkness Forest, where the Scorner are chasing you down in groups all the time. For damage purposes, aka your heavy slot, I believe the only realistic choices here are linears, machine guns, and rockets. However, as far as rockets go, unless you have someone dedicated to giving you heavy ammo the entire strike, rockets kind of fall off short in the ammo department in the boss fight as it goes on, whereas linears are ammo efficient and have ammo refund perks on top to boot. Machine guns, while they're not the best damage dealers in the world, admittedly, provide some constant damage and allows you to clear ad waves quickly if it's needed. Something like Retrofit Escapade can pump out damage, break barrier shields, and give you deep ammo reserves all in one. Thunderlord is also not a bad pick, however, then you are locked out of using something like Arbalist and Finality, which probably isn't worth it. Alright, enough yelling about loadouts, let's actually talk about the strike. First up, a tip for the opening section. You can force the boss to leave early by putting a certain amount of damage onto the boss. This can give you some breathing space if it's needed, otherwise, kill the barrier champions and proceed as normal. For the Hive Lightbearer room, there's a few basic tips to follow. First off, never stand together in a tight space. Ever. One destructo disc from the Lightbearer can send your team straight to orbit if you're reckless, so don't do it. Second, once you've dealt with the first Lightbearer, your team should set up in the back of the room, or where you entered from, essentially, and take out enemies one by one. The reasoning here is that eventually you will hit the trigger point for the next wave to spawn in, which will include another Lightbearer spawning right next to you. Use this positioning to essentially spawn kill him and the ghost, and then worry about the thrall afterwards. At this point, most of the threats are dead, and you can calmly take it one at a time until you finally killed the last Lightbearer. For the gondola room, I'm just going to dub that, before getting on the actual boat itself, one small tip here is that once you've downed one of the Lightbearers, whether it's the left or the right, it doesn't matter, you can safely stand on that side of the room and shoot the second one across the map and be completely safe from their shield throws. Their shield throw is just shy of reaching you from across the map, so it'll never actually hit you as long as you're standing in the back. This gives you a free kill on the second Lightbearer. Just make sure someone is ready to go take out the ghost afterward. Once the boat is activated, the first tip here is get the hell off the boat. Unless you're a crack team that just stands there and shoots everything down immediately on sight, which at this point you wouldn't even need this guy to begin with, the boat is just a death trap. Instead, climb the walls on the left or the right side, work your way up, and then get through each wizard gradually until you make it to the final Shrieker and the portal. In the Darkness Forest, it's all about just keeping pace and timing your lamps. Here is where those Waveframe GLs can be a lifesaver. Make sure you're always on top of shooting mobs near lamps as well, because they can and will one-shot you. Additionally, there's some weird method where you can all stick to the right side for infinity time and just kind of crab walk to the end, but I've never done this personally, so I don't recommend it. Just thought I'd mention it as someone will probably bring it up anyway. Finally, the boss room. There are two main factors to keep in mind here. The first one is a big one. The boss and how his AI aggro works. The general breakdown here is that the Lightblade normally, and I say normally because we all know how Bungie games work, normally the boss cannot hit you if he does not have line of sight on you. If he does not have line of sight on you, he will chase one of you down. If he chases one of you down, and the person is above or under the Lightblade, he will jump to you. This is crucial information because this allows us to manipulate his AI into doing what we want him to do. In other words, if I'm the boss aggro babysitter, my job is to always abuse his movement and make sure I'm having him jumping jacking... Wait a minute. You know what? Let's just cut that. I'm going to leave that in here, Police. Let's change that a little bit. We're going to have him jumping up and down forever. If I'm on the top floor, I jump to the bottom. As soon as I see him jump, then I jump up. If I'm on the bottom floor and I jump to the middle pillar, as soon as I see him jumping down, then I'm going to jump to the top floor. So if I'm in the middle pillar and he's in the bottom, I will jump to the top floor back up to make sure he still follows me, but still has trouble seeing me in light of sight terms. I'll have the footage up on screen here, and you can just be the judge for yourself. But for the most part, unless the game just screws you over, this is a fantastic strat to just keep perma aggro on him at all times and let your teammates do what they need to do, or just keep damage on him gradually as well. Big tip number 2 for this is the boss health gates and the enemy spawn rotations. To best describe this, I'm just going to label this room as a clock. The rotation of the clock is based on looking at the statue of Oryx and going clockwise from there. The boss will spawn in waves during the following. At 75%, the boss goes immune. He summons 2 Arc-Knights and a Hive Lightbearer. Nuke the Lightbearer immediately and finish the ghost. From there, you can kill 1 Arc-Knight, but leave the other one alive. They are almost no threat to you, as they are just Sword Knights, so they will just chase you like idiots until you give them the sweet release of death. The reason why you don't kill the second Knight immediately is positioning. Once this Knight dies, the next wave of enemies spawn in, and here is where the clock comes in handy. By positioning your fire team members between 12 to 3 o'clock, or 9 to 12 o'clock, or both in this case, you will have perfect angles on all the enemies spawning in. This gives you the chance to crowd control them immediately. Tether, Arbalist, hell, even Stasis, whatever you gotta do, execute properly, and you'll be able to kill off the champions off rip. Additionally, one more thing to mention for this is there are a little spikes in the ceiling that you can kind of sit on, which gives you a bit of a hiding spot from the boss, who, by the way, starts moving again after that second Sword Knight dies, but still gives you an angle to kill said enemies. Once all enemies are dead and you are returned to the boss babysit duty, gradually lower his health to 50%, and watch out for thralls spawning in along the way as you're doing this. At 50%, the process will repeat. The boss goes immune, 2 Sword Knights and a Hive Lightbearer spawn in, nuke the Lightbearer and 1 Knight. Once ready, kill the second Knight, and here come the 2 waves of spawning in adds and 2 champions once again. Take care of them, and now you're at the halfway point. Small correction here, you actually get the barrier champions and the acolytes to spawn at 50%, and then the second Lightbearer and the 2 Sword Knights spawn at 33% instead. Finally, the fight repeats itself with a slight twist. The Lightblade becomes angry at you and is moving faster, but he's still kiteable, just FYI. Additionally, the enemy spawn will be at around the 33% health mark. 2 more barrier champions will spawn in with some acolytes, but there won't be a Hive Lightbearer this time. Correction number 2. As mentioned earlier, there is a Hive Lightbearer at this point, swapped between 50 and 33%. This is all a game of positioning and making sure that whoever has aggro on the boss is just paying attention. Make sure that you have things under control as you're going into that 33% health mark, and you can repeat the process again of spawn killing the adds one last time, including both barrier champions. And if something goes wrong, don't panic and just try to utilize your loadouts with your choices of Arbalest, Finality, Tether, and so on. Assuming you have finished the champs off, you're essentially home free. The final portion is just draining the boss's health down to 0 and finishing the strike. And that is the GM Lightblade guide. Hopefully this helps. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, like, share, subscribe. It does help the channel. Much appreciated. And that's all for today. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Goodbye.